So we should probably crack on. Pat, I think, are you driving the slides, Pat? If so, if you could put it onto the next slide, that would be amazing. So I'm Tim Elkington. I'm the Chief Industry Officer at the IAB. And welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which basically is all about the gold standard and what you need to do in order to stay certified from the end of March, beginning of April this year. So we'll talk you through the changes, and there'll also be plenty of time for questions. We're recording this as well, I should let you know, just for the benefit of people that weren't able to make it today. And if you do have questions, please share them in the Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen, and we will come to those at the end. So just to kind of let you know exactly what we're going to go through, Pat, if you could just go back to the agenda slide, please. Thank you. I will give you a brief intro, talk about why the gold standard matters. I'll then hand over to Christy, who heads up our sort of policy and regulatory affairs team. And it's a really important time for the gold standard. So Christy will talk about it in the context of the government's online advertising task force. And then Christy will hand over to Oriane, and Oriane will let you know all about exactly what the changes are and what the process is in updating your certification. And then we'll definitely have time for Q&A at the end. We're lucky also to have Hilary from the Tech Lab on the call, who will handle probably some of the more sort of technical questions. But this is a really good opportunity for you guys to ask anything you want, make any clarifications, and so do please take that opportunity and use the Q&A. So next slide, please, Pat. So hopefully, you're all sort of broadly familiar with this. The gold standard tackles some really important stuff. We announced it in 2017. We launched it in 2018. So it's kind of 6 years old. And we've added pieces to the gold standard throughout to make it more effective. But the core things that it does is it reduces ad fraud by implementing a range of Tech Lab tools. It upholds brand safety. Everyone is tag brand safety certified. We adhere to the Coalition for Better Advertising standards to make sure that consumers aren't served annoying ads which might cause them to install an ad blocker. We make sure that everyone's up to date with the latest version of IAB Europe's TCF to help compliance with GDPR and e-privacy law. And then we also sort of strengthen supply chain transparency by tools such as Demand Chain Object and the Open Measurement SDK. So it does like a range of things, all of which are pretty helpful in terms of maintaining standards. And if you could whiz to the next slide, please, Pat. So what's really important about the latest iteration, the one that we're talking to you about today, is that it really addresses what the government has been saying is a real priority, which is basically the sort of scam ads, fraud that causes consumer harm. As soon as something moves from a sort of B2B environment into a consumer harms environment, the government gets super interested because by solving that problem, they can win votes. So some of the latest things that we're adding around the ASA and around the FCA that Oriane will talk about really sort of address the government's concerns. Why else does it matter? Well, we're always encouraging buyers to prioritize suppliers that are gold standard certified, and that work continues. And hopefully it has a sort of positive effect in terms of consumers as well. But you'll hear a bit more about its importance in a second in terms of the government's work from Christy. Next slide, please, Pat. So I'm going to hand over to Christy, who is our Head of Policy and Regulatory Affairs. And Christy is going to talk about how it fits into the government's online advertising programme.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about the sort of regulatory drivers that help support the need for gold standard adoption, and to explain sort of a bit more about what Tim was talking about in terms of why the gold standard is important to the government, but also therefore additional reasons why it's important to the industry beyond the points that Tim was talking about in terms of commercial reasons. So just a little bit of background, because I know not everybody will be as close to this as I am. So there's been an ongoing review that the government's been carrying out of digital advertising regulation called the Online Advertising Programme. This has been looking at the role of different parts of the supply chain in creating a transparent and accountable market, and at whether regulators have got the right powers and tools to regulate and minimise harmful ads. So as Tim said, kind of very much a priority focus on consumer harms that can arise from digital advertising. There was a formal consultation in 2022, which we and our members submitted a comprehensive response to. And in that, we explained in detail how the ecosystem works, but particularly how existing industry-led regulation, including initiatives like the gold standard, can tackle known issues. We stressed in our response that this was an opportunity for the government to work with the industry to design and develop a modern digital-first regulatory framework, but that they should also support effective industry-led regulation, and that there should be a distinction between the companies doing the right things and the bad actors who are responsible for illegal activity, which is not only bad for consumers, but also bad for businesses as well. So following the consultation, the government set out some key decisions in July last year about what they intend to do next as part of the online advertising programme. So they identified 2 priority areas of consumer risk or harm that the work's going to focus on from now on. And one of those is illegal ads, which includes scams that can lead to consumer fraud. And the other area is age-restricted ads, which we're not going to be covering today. The government said, and I'm going to quote here, more must be done both by the government and by those across the whole advertising supply chain to prevent bad actors using online advertising as a method of reaching victims, and therefore to support the success of this important industry. So when they say more must be done, what does that mean? In the longer term, the government plans to introduce legal requirements for companies in the digital ad supply chain to ensure that they're taking appropriate measures to prevent harmful ads from appearing. We don't have a much more detail about those plans at the moment. They will be covered in a future consultation. But in practice at the moment, there isn't time for new legislation in this Parliament, i.e. before the next election happens. Please don't ask me when that might be, but it will certainly be before next January, February. It will be sometime this year. So in the meantime, Pat, if you could just click forward a slide, please. The government has set up an online advertising task force to take forward action in those areas of harm that it's concerned about. So this is a government and industry forum chaired by the DCMS Minister, Julia Lopez. We at the IAB sit on the task force along with other industry trade bodies and government departments. And it's a mechanism for the industry to work with the government, which we've been advocating for, to continue to address the problems of illegal ads and age-restricted ads before any future legislation is brought in. So the government has said it wants to use the task force to harness industry expertise and to support industry solutions, and that includes the gold standard. So the way that this is going to work is that the task force has published some objectives and an action plan, and then that will evolve into different working groups to involve members from their various trade bodies who are part of the task force. Specifically in terms of the gold standard, we've included a work stream in the action plan that's focused on gold standard adoption. So we at the IAB are leading that work, but importantly, it also involves public commitments from ISBA, the IPA and the AA to work with us to do that, so that the wider market is supporting the gold standard as well as the IAB and our members, because everybody needs to play their part in it being effective. We'll have some more details to share about the task force work over the next few months, but the reason why it's really relevant today is that there is a specific focus within that work on the new fraud-related elements of the gold standard criteria, because they can both help to protect consumers from seeing harmful ads and scam ads in the first place, and they can help to identify and eliminate the sources of bad ads in the supply chain. So as one example of work within the task force, and this part of it in particular, ISBA have specifically committed to working with us to encourage advertisers to adopt relevant gold standard requirements, such as demand chain object, so that they become essential to their members doing business. In terms of kind of the wider why this matters, not just specifically to help protect consumers from scam ads, but more widely, the IAB has spent a lot of time on behalf of members advocating for the gold standard to demonstrate that, contrary to what's often claimed, digital advertising is regulated, and we do have effective standards and certifications that can and do evolve to tackle problems. The gold standard obviously matters to advertisers, and having the buy side on board is really critical, but it also matters to our reputation as an industry and as individual companies, to consumers who should be safe online, and as I've explained, it really matters to the government too. Taking that one step further, effective adoption of the gold standard is also a way to stave off some of the worst case scenarios in terms of future legislation. Essentially, the more we can do now to address problems ourselves, the stronger our argument is for keeping the scope and focus of any future legislation narrow and targeted towards the bad actors, and not at the responsible companies who are already doing the right thing, which is you. But that's only going to work if everybody's involved and committed. The window of time we have before any legislation might be introduced is seen by the government as an opportunity for the industry to demonstrate its ability to successfully tackle online advertising harms through collaboration and innovation. So now that the government has recognised the gold standard and that it is part of the solution to the issues that they care about, we really have to live up to that. So I'm handing over to Oriane now, who's going to explain more about the new criteria and how to recertify.
Thank you, Christy, for the explanation of the OAT and the role the gold standard plays in addressing key industry issues. So I will now discuss the updates that we've made to the gold standard, that we made to the latest version, including the implementation of demand chain object. We also ask that you add buyers.json to your 2024 product roadmap and make sure that you include Financial Conduct Authority financial service checks in your onboarding process for new and existing clients. We want to ensure that a member of staff is registered for the ASA Scam Ad Alert system, and implementing IAB Europe's transparency and consent framework to the version 2.2 specification. Just to make it clear, we've also removed versioning of the gold standard, so no longer referring to the gold standard as 2.1, 2.0, there's no new 2.2, it's just the gold standard now. Thanks, Pat. So moving on to a little bit of a deep dive on buyers.json and demand chain object. A major requirement for agencies and publishers is that they have to support demand chain object and buyers.json. So for a buyer planner, that means public support through blog posts, that could be on LinkedIn or your own website, trade press, or pledging support online. For a company in the buy activation category, that means encouragement through comms to partners, informing them about the initiatives and asking them about their plans for adoption. And last but not least, for a publisher, requirements also include encouragement to partners, as well as training through your own means or signing up to the IAB UK training once available. So we anticipate this will be made publicly available at the end of Q1. Next slide, please, Pat. So the gold standard requirements for DSPs, SSPs, and full stack companies are pretty much the same. We ask that you include buyers.json in your 2024 product roadmap, include demand chain object in your bid request, have some sort of public support for buyers.json and demand chain object, which could be a blog post or pledge of support, encourage upstream partners to adopt buyers.json and demand chain objects. So as an SSP, this would mean emailing your DSP partners and asking them about their adoption plans. Regarding technical implementation, SSPs can either extend or initiate demand chain objects. So SSP can extend an existing demand chain object, it receives a bid response, or initiate a new incomplete demand chain object if no object is present. Next slide, please, Pat. When implementing a buyers.json file, DSPs are required to implement a file at the root domain of their advertising system. So whatever your DSP is called /buyers.json. The CIDs in the buyers.json file can remain anonymized if needed. and DSP should initiate demand chain objects when possible and include them in all bid responses. The D chain should include all entities involved in payments for an impression up until that point. Next slide, please. Thank you. And similar to DSPs and SSPs for the requirements, and once again, similar to what was just stated for DSPs. Next slide, please, Pat. So here we have an example of a bias.json file. It will be made publicly available, much similar to that of an ads.txt or a sellers.json file for the sell side. Information inside the bias.json file includes buyer ID, name, domain, and buyer type, as well as the created on date. Next slide, please. And then here we have a demand chain object example, which includes the D chain node, the version number, the complete integer where 0 would equal no and 1 would equal yes. The ASI, which is the advertising system identifier, which is an extension acting as a placeholder for the advertising system. And this information will get passed through the bid stream. Next slide, please, Pat. Okay, so here we have the process for migrating to the latest version, and it's quite simple. So you will send your evidence to goldstandard@iabuk.com. A member of the team will review your evidence and make any queries necessary on the grid if further information is required. More often than not, this involves a lot of back and forth to ensure evidence received is correct and meets the criteria. And once that process is complete, then you'll be sent your email confirmation, your assets that you can use on socials or PR, and your listing will be updated on our site. Thank you. So what happens after March 28th, you ask, which is the big question. Hopefully this grid will help to visualize what will happen to companies once Q1 is over. So registered companies at the end of March who have not been certified will be removed from the registered list. 2.1 and 2.0 companies who have not renewed to the latest versions of Gold Standard will be moved down to registered for 6 months from March 28th. Anyone who has renewed since October 2023 will remain Gold Standard up until a year from their renewal date as per our usual renewal process. Okay, so that's it from me. Next, you're going to move on to a Q&A portion of the webinar. So please feel free to put any questions in the chat, and I'll hand over to Hilary from Tech Lab to answer any technical questions.
That's great. Many thanks for that, Oriane. So there's I don't know, like there's two clear things that really stand out from my point of view. One is what Christy said about the government and the role that the gold standard can play in mitigating the risk of any legislation that would be unfavourable to the digital advertising sector. So we do have this window of opportunity where by embracing the gold standard, making sure we're all on the latest version, we can actually demonstrate to government that the industry is very capable of regulating itself. And obviously the risk of that not happening is that the government is minded to intervene, and we will have a lot less control over what that intervention looks like than if we all implement the gold standard. And the other thing that stood out was some stuff that Oriane said about, I think things moving forward are just going to be a lot simpler, because at the moment we've got version 2.0, version 2.1. People say, well, I'm going to upgrade to the next version. I need 3 months. And in some cases, timelines from our point of view and also from members haven't been quite as tight as maybe they should have been. So it's just going to be much simpler from Q2 this year. You're either going to be certified or you're not. But we encourage everyone to sort of make those changes. But do please, this is a really good opportunity to ask any questions you've got about the process. We've got Hilary here, who is a black belt technical expert from Tech Lab, who is here to answer any questions. So I can see that we've got a couple coming into the Q&A, which I'm gonna read out, and then if anyone else has got any other questions, then do please answer. So there's a question from Alice. Alice, thank you for that. I have a question about the disconnect between the expectation for buyers.json and demand chain objects as the two are linked together. Why does one just need to be on the roadmap and the other provide bid stream data as part of the evidence? We would expect them to be developed at the same time. So I think I have a basic understanding of what the answer is, but I think, Hilary, you're going to have a much better understanding of what the answer is. So the disconnect between our expectations around what you're doing for buyers.json and demand chain objects.
Yeah, so it's quite similar to how like sellers.json or like how the ads.txt, sellers.json, and the supply chain object all work together. When the initial specification got released, you know, frankly, there was quite a lot of spirited feedback from the buy side around whether or not that they would be willing to include certain specific information. So it was decoupled so that when you use the D chain, when you send the D chain object in the bid stream, you do get at least some level of transparency, although you don't get that, you don't get, the full tip to tail. I will say though, that was before a lot of the incoming legislation and conversations have happened. And, if there are regulatory reasons to send it both work in conjunction with each other. You just don't need to have one to be able to send D chain.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hilary. Alice, I hope that answers your question. But if there's other points that need clarifying, do sort of follow up in the Q&A. The second question was just a sort of logistical question. Will you be releasing this as a video, as a few of us missed the start? Yes, we definitely will. And apologies if it was difficult to join or there was any admin mishaps on our behalf, but we have recorded the whole thing. So we will definitely be distributing the video, so you won't miss anything. The next question is, what percentage of current registrants have moved on to the new standard? So the answer is very much it's work in progress. It's probably a relatively small number at the moment. Hence, one of the reasons we wanted to do the webinar today, to just make sure that everyone was clear what they had to do. But obviously, we're hoping Oriane will have the very latest numbers. We've probably got about 80 different companies certified at the moment, and we'd like as many of those to move on to the new standard from end of March, beginning of April. But it's currently work in progress. So there's another question from an anonymous attendee. We're tag platinum certified as attested by a third party. What additional assurance does the gold standard offer our customers? It's becoming more difficult to justify time and energy towards the certification, especially related to buyers.json and demand chain object, as we really need traction from the buy side before we can pull engineering resources away from the others. Is there any data available on buy side adoption? So I'm just going to, any other member of the IAB team who wants to chip in, do give me a shout, but I'm just going to sort of plow on answering the questions for now. It's a really good question, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we're always pushing the gold standard to the buy side. Probably the best evidence that we have at the moment is sort of anecdotal rather than sort of quantifiable or numerical. So, we have lots of conversations with agencies and advertisers about their support. But I think probably the sort of secret sauce that we've been looking for from 2017, 2018 has arrived in the form of the government work that Christy was talking about. So with ISBA's pledge to support the gold standard, I think that sort of takes us into a sort of really powerful place. But if you'd like to talk about that more and talk about the kind of evidence that you would like to see, then do please email me. It's just tim@iabuk.com, and we can definitely take that online. But yes, let's see what additional evidence we can supply around that.
Tim, if I can just jump in quickly, I know the Trade Desk does support it. So Tech Lab doesn't. We don't monitor adoption numbers, but I do know that the Trade Desk does support sending the D chain object. It's It's used in the US market for basically a burn down reporting against upfront commitments. So there is like a carrot for the buy side in addition to the regulatory stick to send this information and support the sending and receiving of it.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Hilary. I'm just going to move on to the next question. So it's a question from David. David, thank you for that. With regards to financial advertisers check on the latest audit, is the expectation this is a full sign-off process, or can it be as simple as a stakeholder simply checking they're on the approved list manually and confirming over email? Brackets, I'm possibly simplifying here. Oriane or Pat, I don't know if you want to come back with more information about what we're expecting in terms of the FCA checks.
Yeah, I can chime in on that. So for that one, we want to see that you include it in your process for onboarding financial clients. So just as a check, it could be a checklist, it can be a conversation that this is something that you already do or you are doing, but just a process that you yourselves do to ensure that you are checking this, or maybe comms to show that you regularly get updates from your clients to show that they actually are on this list, if that's clear.
Brilliant. Thank you, Oriane. Alice, I'm going to come back to you again in a second. There's another question from a delegate. As a publisher, do we really need to provide evidence of promoting buyers.json and demand chain objects? And then Oriane, I'm going to pass that over to you again.
So yes, part of the requirements is that you are sort of advocating for the initiative. So that will be, you know, comms to your partners, asking about when they are going to implement it. Maybe Hilary can add some more context, but I believe SSPs do have to implement buyers.json as well. So yes, we do ask, not necessarily for public support for publishers, I believe, but we do ask that you have comms to your partners to ask them about their implementation, their adoption plans.
Yeah, and to follow on from a technical perspective, the lift is somewhat lighter on the SSP side, but you do have to do something in order to be able to read the demand chain object itself.
Brilliant. Thanks, Hilary. Thanks, Oriane. Alice, I just want to follow up on your question again, which was about the sort of disconnect between having to implement demand chain objects, but only have buyers.json in your roadmap. And I think the sort of nub of your question was about why there's a sort of difference between the two. Pat, I don't know if you wanted to come in on that at all.
Yeah, there are a couple of bits that kind of come into this. So the first one is just in terms of some of the feedback that we got for how basically the sort of difficulty in terms of implementation. So we found that there was a lot more adoption to date of dchain. So in a sense, it seemed like a more achievable sort of expectation that people would implement it for this latest iteration. So that's kind of one of the key bits. And we are sort of trying to keep our ear close to the ground more broadly, just to see how the sort of adoption rate of buyers.json is going. But that's kind of the main reason for now, at least with this iteration. And again, we'll be looking at how we sort of how we look at the kind of broad implementation and sort of enforcement of buyers.json sort of further down the line. But I believe, Alice, we've also got a catch up on Thursday, so happy to sort of go into depth around this as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pat. And hopefully, Alice, that helps. And it sounds like you've got a follow-up meeting arranged already, which is great. There's a question from Gareth. Gareth, thank you for adding the question. As an intermediary stroke buyer activation business, our understanding is that we aren't required to measure TCF consent string percentages, as this implies we're responsible for these volumes. In our case, is it not the third-party DSP we are using who technically hold the accountability? If we're working with gold standard certified partners, does providing said list of downstream partners, brackets DSPs, fully address this? I'm going to rely on someone else to provide an answer to that. Or it might be that because it's quite a detailed question, we can get back to you sort of offline. But Pat.
Yeah, I was going to try and yes, we can come back with a kind of very specific answer for you guys, but yes, because if you won't have necessarily the sort of viewability of that, it would be a case of yeah, basically listing your certified partners. So yeah, we'll come back with a comprehensive sort of email so you have that all in writing.
Brilliant, thanks, Pat. And then I can see there's another follow-up comment from Alice. Thanks, Alice. Which is sort of continuing the discussion around buyers.json and demand chain objects. But I think probably as you already have a meeting arranged, I'm going to leave you guys to sort that out offline.
Yes, I'll make a note of the of this particular bit of feedback, Alice, and we can talk about that on Thursday.
Amazing. Thanks again, Pat. Are there any other questions? So, and I do think it's, if you do have anything else that you want to share, whether anonymously or not anonymously, it is a really super useful forum to share them in, because we do have till the end of March, hopefully, to get as many people as we possibly can across to the new latest version of the gold standard. And if you've got any questions, I mean, do please email any of us afterwards. It's tim@iabuk.com, for example. But if you've got any questions and you want to place them in the Q&A, then this is a really good opportunity. I'm going to give it 20 seconds of sort of awkward silence, just so that everyone's had enough time to reflect. Great. We have got another question. Thank you very much. Along with the technical challenges, we're concerned about the confidentiality of some clients, good actors, not bad actors. Are there any solutions for buyers.json? Hilary, that sounds like a question for you.
It's a fantastic question. So that spirited feedback that I mentioned before, largely, I was actually at a very large media buying agency at the time, and that was the confidentiality, particularly in the US, which is an agent market, does bring up some of those sort of commercially sensitive, like those questions around commercial sensitivities. There is a mechanism within buyers.json to remain, for the actual advertiser, the end advertiser, to remain confidential while the ad tech stacks in between are named.
And if you share the link that's relevant to that documentation with us, Hilary, then we can sort of distribute it afterwards.
Yeah, happy to.
Because that sounds like that sounds like a good solution.
Yep.
Amazing, thank you. Brilliant. Are there any more questions at all? Okay, so a couple of things. Yes, we will share the video. We'll just tidy it up to make sure it's got a sort of clear start and end. So we'll share the video. So if you did miss the start, apologies from me, but hopefully the video will give you everything. If you have any questions, please let us know. The team here is on hand to make it as easy as possible for you to certify. And we're going to be reaching out to make sure that people have got all the information they need. Sounds like we've got a couple of follow-up meetings already arranged for this week. If you would like a follow-up meeting, but you don't currently have one, and you've got some outstanding questions that you need help with, again, do please give us a shout. We're here to help. And just thank you to Hilary for answering the technical questions, Christy for providing the political context, and then Oriane for talking everything through. But if we don't have any more questions, or we do, excellent, amazing. We've got one that I'd missed. Can you clarify what level of transparency is required for certification if buyers.json is not required? Pat, that sounds like it's a question for you or Oriane.
Yeah, Saad, I'll take that one offline now. And need to dissect it and maybe need a bit of extra context to answer it properly.
Okay, thank you, Pat. And we've got Hillary's link, which we will share in the follow-up and the notes to this. So I think that is everything. Yes, thank you very much to everyone that contributed. Thank you to you guys for taking the time to go through this, and do get in touch, reach out, email, anything. Visit the IAB office if you've got any questions, because we're definitely here to help. But I think for today, we're done. Thanks very much, guys.